Montana Territory, 1879. The frontier still held its wild beauty, though civilization was steadily encroaching on the untamed lands. The small town of Pine Creek sat nestled between rolling grasslands and the jagged mountains that dominated the western horizon. It was a place where the law was still finding its footing, and where people came to either escape their past or forge a new future. Ethan Quincy believed the frontier was no place for tenderness. At 25, he'd already witnessed enough violence and hardship to last several lifetimes. The son of a Texas rancher who died in the war, Ethan had made his way north with nothing but his horse, his skill with cattle, and the firm conviction that a man survived the West by keeping to himself. "Another day, another dollar," he mumbled to himself as he guided his horse toward the small ranch where he'd been working for the past 8 months. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Such beauty seemed almost cruel in a land that could kill a man 100 different ways. Ethan's lean frame sat easily in the saddle, his movements fluid with the horse beneath him. His sandy brown hair curled slightly where it emerged from beneath his wide-brimmed hat, and a light stubble covered his jaw. His blue eyes, which the ranch owner's wife claimed were his best feature, rarely reflected the smile that sometimes appeared on his lips. Those eyes had seen too much. The Double S Ranch wasn't much, just enough cattle to keep its owner, Samuel Stone, and his family comfortable, with extra to pay hands like Ethan. It wasn't a permanent arrangement. Nothing in Ethan's life was permanent. He drifted from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to form attachments. Attachments meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got men killed out west. As the ranch house came into view, Ethan noticed an unfamiliar wagon parked outside. Visitors were rare this far from town. His hand instinctively moved to the revolver on his hip, a habit born from years of frontier caution. "Ethan," Samuel called from the porch, "come meet our guests. My niece is visiting from Chicago." Ethan dismounted with a sigh. Social niceties weren't his strong suit, but he respected Samuel enough to be polite. He secured his horse to the hitching post and removed his hat as he approached the house. "Rebecca, this is Ethan Quincy, my best hand," Samuel said as Ethan stepped onto the porch. "Ethan, this is my niece, Rebecca Morgan." The woman who turned to face him was unlike anyone Ethan had seen in this territory. At 22, Rebecca Morgan was the picture of Eastern refinement. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a fashionable style, though a few tendrils had escaped to frame her face. Her green eyes assessed him with undisguised curiosity, and her blue traveling dress, though slightly dusty from the journey, was clearly of fine quality. But it was the determination in her posture that caught Ethan's attention, the slight lift of her chin, the straightness of her spine. This was no wilting flower come to visit the frontier. "Mr. Quincy," she said, extending her hand, "a pleasure to meet you." Ethan hesitated before taking her gloved hand briefly. "Miss Morgan." "Rebecca will be staying with us for some time," Samuel explained. "Perhaps indefinitely. Her parents passed last winter, God rest their souls." "I'm sorry for your loss," Ethan said automatically, though his mind was calculating how this new presence would disrupt the quiet routine of ranch life. Rebecca's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Quincy. I'm looking forward to experiencing the West that my uncle has written about so enthusiastically." "It's not like the novels, Miss Morgan," Ethan said bluntly. "It's harsh country." "I'm aware that reality often differs from fiction, Mr. Quincy," she replied, a spark of something, perhaps irritation, perhaps amusement, lighting her eyes. "I'm not afraid of harsh realities." Samuel laughed, breaking the tension. "Rebecca's made of sterner stuff than you might think, Ethan. Now come inside, both of you. Martha's put together a fine supper." As they entered the house, Ethan couldn't help but think that Rebecca Morgan represented everything he'd left behind: civilization, refinement, complications. She was exactly the kind of distraction he didn't need. Yet as they sat around the dinner table, he found himself watching her, noticing how quickly she engaged with Martha, how attentively she listened to Samuel's stories, how her laugh seemed to brighten the entire room. For the first time in years, Ethan found himself wondering if his solitary approach to life might have cost him something essential. The next morning dawned clear and crisp. Ethan was in the corral breaking a new horse when he noticed Rebecca watching from the fence. She'd exchanged her traveling dress for a simpler skirt and blouse, though she still looked out of place on a working ranch. "Is there something I can help you with, Miss Morgan?" he called, keeping his attention on the nervous young stallion. "I'm simply observing, Mr. Quincy," she replied. "I've never seen a horse being trained before." Ethan guided the horse in a tight circle, his movements gentle but firm. "This isn't training so much as coming to an understanding." Rebecca tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "Horse like this, he's got spirit. Breaking him doesn't mean crushing that spirit. It means reaching an agreement." The horse snorted and pranced sideways, but Ethan kept his seat easily. "He learns to trust me, I learn to trust him. Then we can work together." "That's surprisingly poetic for a cowboy," Rebecca remarked. Ethan shot her a look. "I'm not much for poetry, Miss Morgan, just practicality. A horse that fears you will betray you when you need him most." "And is that your philosophy with people as well, Mr. Quincy? Trust must be earned." The question struck uncomfortably close to home. "People are more complicated than horses." "Indeed they are," she smiled slightly. "My uncle says you're from Texas originally." "That's right. What brought you to Montana?" Ethan guided the horse toward the center of the corral. "Change of scenery." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "That's quite a change." "Some changes are necessary." His tone made it clear the conversation was over. Rebecca seemed about to say something more when Samuel called her from the house. With a nod to Ethan, she turned and walked away. Ethan watched her go, wondering why he felt both relief and disappointment at her departure. The days that followed established a routine. Ethan avoided the main house when possible, focusing on his work. But inevitably, he found himself crossing paths with Rebecca. To his surprise, she showed no inclination to stay indoors with Martha. Instead, she was constantly exploring the ranch, asking questions, even attempting to learn some of the basic tasks. "You're holding it wrong," Ethan said one afternoon, finding her struggling with a lasso in the barn. Rebecca gave him a frustrated look. "Then perhaps instead of stating the obvious, you might show me the correct method." Against his better judgment, Ethan stepped forward. "Here," he said, demonstrating the proper grip. "It's in the wrist movement." Rebecca attempted to copy him, failing spectacularly as the rope tangled around her feet. She laughed, a genuine sound that caught Ethan off guard. "I clearly need more practice." "Why are you bothering with this anyway?" Ethan asked as he helped her untangle the rope. "You're not planning to rope cattle, are you?" Rebecca straightened, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm not here for a brief visit, Mr. Quincy. If this is to be my home, I want to understand it. All of it. Even the dirty, difficult parts. Especially those parts." Something in her expression softened. "I know what you think of me, a city girl playing at frontier life, but I've lost everything familiar. My parents, my home, my friends. I refuse to simply exist here as a burden to my aunt and uncle." The honesty in her voice struck Ethan unexpectedly. For the first time, he saw beyond the refined exterior to the determination beneath, and something more, a vulnerability she was fighting hard to conceal. "It takes more than knowing how to throw a rope to survive out here," he said, his voice gentler than he intended. "Then teach me what I need to know." Ethan hesitated. Getting involved meant complication. Complication meant vulnerability, but the challenge in her green eyes was impossible to ignore. "We'll start with riding properly," he said finally. "Tomorrow morning if you're serious." Rebecca's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'm always serious about learning, Mr. Quincy." True to her word, Rebecca appeared at the stables shortly after dawn the next day. Ethan was surprised to see her dressed in a split riding skirt rather than the fashionable attire she'd worn previously. "My aunt had it made in town," she explained, noticing his look. "She said if I intended to ride like a proper Montana woman, I should dress accordingly." Ethan nodded approvingly. It's practical. Out here, practical matters more than fashionable. A lesson I'm quickly learning. Rebecca approached the gentle mare Ethan had saddled for her. Now, will you show me how to mount properly? Uncle Samuel just boosts me up like a sack of flour, which hardly seems dignified. Despite himself, Ethan smiled. Dignity and horses don't always go together, but I'll show you. The riding lesson went better than expected. Rebecca was a quick learner, and though she clearly had some experience with riding in the East, she readily admitted her knowledge was limited to gentle rides in city parks. The land seems endless, she said as they rode along the creek that bordered the ranch. In Chicago, there are buildings everywhere. Here, you can see forever. Ethan glanced at her, struck by the wonder in her expression. It's deceptive. That endlessness can turn deadly if you don't respect it. You speak as if the land itself is alive. In a way, it is. Ethan looked toward the distant mountains. It's not malicious, it's just indifferent. It doesn't care if you live or die. That's a rather bleak perspective. It's realistic. Rebecca studied him. Has the West been cruel to you, Mr. Quincy, or are you naturally so guarded? The question caught him off guard. I've seen what happens to people who don't stay alert out here. Being alert is different from expecting the worst. Her voice was gentle, not accusing. There's beauty here, too. Tremendous beauty. As if to emphasize her point, a pair of eagles soared overhead, their wings spread wide against the vast blue sky. The sight was so magnificent that both riders stopped to watch. See, Rebecca said softly. Not everything out here is trying to kill you. Ethan found himself smiling despite his inclination toward caution. Maybe not everything. The weeks that followed saw a gradual shift in their relationship. Ethan's lessons expanded beyond riding to include basic ranch skills, frontier knowledge, and even shooting. Rebecca proved to be not only eager but remarkably capable. You're a natural, Ethan admitted after she successfully hit 3 bottles in a row with his revolver. Most city folk can't shoot like that their first try. Rebecca lowered the gun, looking pleased. I had a good teacher. And I've always had steady hands. It's more than that, you've got focus. He took the revolver back, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through him. Rebecca seemed to feel it too, her cheeks coloring slightly as she stepped back. Thank you for teaching me. I know it's not part of your duties here. I don't mind, Ethan said, surprised to realize it was true. The time spent with Rebecca had become something he looked forward to rather than an obligation. Their riding expeditions expanded farther from the ranch, allowing Ethan to show Rebecca the hidden beauties of the Montana landscape. A secluded waterfall, meadows filled with wildflowers, a ridge that offered views all the way to the distant mountains. During these rides, conversation flowed more easily than Ethan would have expected. He learned about her life in Chicago, the father who had been a successful merchant, the mother who had insisted on proper education for her daughter. Rebecca spoke of them with a mixture of fondness and grief that Ethan recognized all too well. Do you miss your parents? She asked one afternoon as they rested their horses by a stream. You rarely speak of them. Ethan tossed a stone into the water, watching the ripples spread. My mother died when I was 10, fever. My father was killed during the war. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Rebecca studied him. Time doesn't always heal everything, does it? No, Ethan admitted, but you learn to live with it. Is that why you came west, to escape the memories? Ethan considered deflecting the question as he usually did, but something in Rebecca's genuine interest made him answer honestly. Partly after the war, Texas felt haunted, too many ghosts. I thought heading north might give me a fresh start. And has it? Some days more than others. The conversation was interrupted by the distant rumble of thunder. Ethan glanced at the sky, noticing the dark clouds gathering over the mountains. We should head back, he said, already moving toward his horse. Summer storms out here can turn dangerous quickly. They mounted and started back toward the ranch, but the storm moved faster than anticipated. Within minutes, the sky darkened dramatically and fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a downpour. "There's a line shack about half a mile ahead," Ethan called over the growing storm. "We can wait it out there." Rebecca nodded, her hair already plastered to her face by the rain. They urged their horses forward, fighting against the wind that had begun to howl around them. By the time they reached the small wooden structure, they were both soaked through. Ethan dismounted quickly and helped Rebecca down, then led the horses to the small lean-to attached to the shack. Inside, the single-room structure was basic but dry. A small stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow cot, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. "The ranch maintains these for the hands during roundup or bad weather," Ethan explained as he lit the stove with supplies from the kindling box. "It's not much, but it's shelter." Rebecca stood dripping by the door, her riding clothes clinging to her form. Despite her bedraggled appearance, she managed a smile. "It's perfect. Though I'm afraid I'm creating a puddle." Ethan found a rough blanket in a trunk and handed it to her. "Here, you should get out of those wet clothes before you catch a chill." Rebecca accepted the blanket with a raised eyebrow. "That would be the practical thing to do, wouldn't it? But I'm afraid propriety presents a challenge in these close quarters." For the first time, Ethan fully registered their situation. Alone together in a remote cabin, with a storm that showed no signs of abating soon. It was precisely the kind of compromising scenario that could damage a lady's reputation. "I'll check on the horses," he said quickly. "Take whatever time you need." Outside in the lean-to, Ethan busied himself with the horses longer than necessary, giving Rebecca ample privacy. The rain continued to pour, and lightning split the sky, followed by thunderclaps that made the horses nervous. By the time he felt he could decently return to the cabin, he was soaked all over again. When he entered, he found Rebecca sitting by the stove, the blanket wrapped around her. Her dress and outer garments were spread nearby, steaming slightly in the heat from the stove. "Your turn," she said, gesturing to another blanket she'd found. "Though I promise to be a gentleman and not look." Despite everything, Ethan laughed. "I appreciate the consideration, Miss Morgan. I think, under the circumstances, you might call me Rebecca." "Then I'm Ethan." Rebecca turned her back as Ethan stripped off his wet shirt and jeans, quickly wrapping the blanket around his waist. "Decent now," he said, hanging his clothes near the stove alongside hers. The storm continued to rage outside, creating a strange intimacy within the cabin. Ethan found some coffee in the provisions and set about brewing it on the stove. The familiar task helped maintain some sense of normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. "Do you think the storm will pass soon?" Rebecca asked, accepting the tin cup of coffee he offered. Ethan glanced toward the window, where rain lashed against the glass. "Hard to say. These summer storms sometimes blow over quickly, but this one's got some force behind it. My aunt and uncle will be worried." "They know I'm with you," Ethan said, then realized how that might sound. "What I mean is, they know you're not alone, that I wouldn't let any harm come to you." Rebecca's eyes met his over the rim of her cup. "I know that." Something in her tone made Ethan's heart beat faster. In the small cabin, with rain drumming on the roof and the stove casting a warm glow, the careful distance he'd maintained from Rebecca seemed to be evaporating. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said after a moment of companionable silence. "You can ask. Why do you keep everyone at arm's length? Even my uncle, who speaks so highly of you, says he barely knows anything about you after nearly a year." Ethan stared into his coffee. "It's simpler that way. Simpler perhaps, but lonely. Being alone and being lonely aren't the same thing." Rebecca set her cup down. "Aren't they? I've been surrounded by people my entire life, yet after my parents died, I've never felt more alone. Coming here to a place where I knew almost no one, I expected to feel isolated. Instead, I've found connections, with my aunt and uncle, with this land." She paused. "With you?" Ethan's gaze snapped to hers, finding no teasing or coyness there, only honest sentiment. It terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Rebecca, he began, unsure what to say. You don't have to respond, she said quickly. I just wanted you to know that your efforts to teach me, to help me understand this place, have meant a great deal to me. The thunder cracked directly overhead, making them both jump. Rebecca laughed, breaking the tension. This storm certainly has dramatic timing. Ethan smiled, grateful for the moment of levity. Nature has its own sense of theatrics. As the evening wore on and the storm showed no signs of abating, it became clear they would need to spend the night. The realization brought with it a new awareness of their unusual circumstance. You should take the cot, Ethan said, arranging some spare blankets on the floor for himself. Rebecca looked at the narrow bed, then at Ethan's tall frame. That hardly seems fair. You'll be cramped on the floor. I've slept in worse places. I'm sure you have, but that's not a compelling argument, she smiled. I won't break Ethan. I can take the floor. Absolutely not. Then we appear to be at an impasse. Their eyes met across the small room, and something shifted in the air between them. In that moment, Ethan realized how much he'd come to care for this woman who had arrived so unexpectedly in his carefully constructed solitary life. We should both try to get some rest, he said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. Tomorrow will come soon enough. Rebecca nodded, accepting his evasion of their unspoken tension. Good night, Ethan. Good night, Rebecca. As he lay on his makeshift bed, listening to the storm and Rebecca's soft breathing, Ethan confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with Rebecca Morgan. The realization was both wonderful and terrifying. Love meant vulnerability, vulnerability meant risk, and risk, in Ethan's experience, inevitably led to loss. The storm passed during the night, leaving a fresh, clean morning in its wake. They rode back to the ranch in the early dawn light, both aware that something fundamental had changed between them, though neither spoke of it directly. Samuel and Martha were relieved to see them, having been concerned by their absence during the storm. If they noticed the new awareness between the young people, they were discreet enough not to mention it. Life at the ranch resumed its rhythm, but with subtle differences. Ethan no longer avoided the main house. He found reasons to spend time with Rebecca, continuing her writing lessons, helping her with the small garden she'd started, simply talking as they watched the sunset from the porch. It was during one such sunset that Samuel approached Ethan as he was preparing to leave for his cabin. Walk with me a moment, the older man said, his expression serious. They moved away from the house toward the barn. Ethan's stomach tightened with apprehension, certain that Samuel was about to warn him away from his niece. I've received a letter from the railroad company, Samuel said, surprising Ethan with the unexpected topic. They're planning to run a line through this area next year. That'll change things, Ethan remarked, uncertain where the conversation was heading. It will indeed. Samuel stopped, looking out over his land. Progress is coming, whether we like it or not, and I'm not getting any younger. You've got plenty of years ahead of you. Samuel smiled briefly. Kind of you to say, but the fact remains, this ranch needs thinking about for the future. He turned to face Ethan directly. I've watched you these past months. You're a good worker, honest, skilled, and lately I've seen something else in you, a kind of settling. Sir. You've been a drifter, Ethan. No shame in that. Many good men wander before they find their place. But I think you might have found yours here. Ethan was silent, the truth of Samuel's words resonating within him. I've no son of my own, Samuel continued. Martha and I were never blessed that way. I've been thinking about taking on a partner in the ranch, someone with a stake in its future, someone who might eventually take over when I'm no longer able. The implication was clear, and it left Ethan momentarily speechless. Mr. Stone, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet, think on it. Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. And while you're thinking, consider this, I've seen how you look at my niece. And how she looks at you. Heat rose in Ethan's face. Sir, Samuel held up a hand. Rebecca is like a daughter to us. Her happiness matters greatly. If that happiness includes you, well, Martha and I wouldn't object. Provided your intentions are honorable, of course. They would never be otherwise, Ethan said firmly. Good, that's settled then. Samuel turned toward the house. Think about my offer, Ethan. A man should have roots, something to build on. Something to fight for. As Samuel walked away, Ethan remained rooted to the spot, his mind reeling. A partnership in the ranch, a future, and Rebecca. The possibility of a life so different from the solitary existence he'd resigned himself to was both exhilarating and terrifying. Could he really set aside his wariness and embrace such a future? Could he trust in happiness after so many years of guarding against loss? The next morning, Ethan rode into Pine Creek with a purpose. The small town had grown since he'd first arrived in the area, now boasting a proper general store, a saloon, a small church, and even a doctor's office. Ethan tied his horse outside the general store and entered, nodding to the proprietor, Harold Jenkins. Ethan, unusual to see you in town midweek, Harold called. What can I help you with? I need to send a telegram, Ethan replied, and I'm looking for something special, a gift. Harold raised his eyebrows with interest, but asked no questions, as he pointed Ethan toward the small telegraph office at the back of the store. After composing and sending his message, Ethan browsed the store's limited selection of items that might be suitable for a lady. He was examining a delicate silver hair comb when the door opened, admitting 3 rough-looking men. Ethan's instincts immediately heightened. He didn't recognize them as locals. Harold greeted them cautiously. Gentlemen, what can I help you with today? The tallest of the 3, a man with a pockmarked face and cold eyes, surveyed the store. Just passing through, needed supplies. His gaze landed on Ethan, narrowing slightly. Well now, if it ain't Ethan Quincy. Ethan straightened, his hand instinctively moving closer to his gun. Do I know you? The man grinned, revealing a gold tooth. You might not remember me, but I sure remember you. Waco, Texas, 71. You were riding with the Rangers then, weren't you? The mention of his past sent a chill through Ethan. Few people in Montana knew of his time with the Texas Rangers, a period of his life marked by violence and ultimately tragedy. That was a long time ago. Not so long that folks forget. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes, particularly folks who had family on the wrong end of Ranger justice. The implied threat hung in the air. Harold, sensing danger, moved slowly toward the shotgun he kept under the counter. I'm not looking for trouble, Ethan said evenly. Whatever grievance you think you have with me, this isn't the place to address it. Maybe not, the man conceded. But Pine Creek's a small town. I reckon we'll have another opportunity to reminisce. He tipped his hat mockingly. Boys, let's get what we need and move on for now. The tension in the store was palpable as the men gathered basic supplies. Ethan remained alert, watching their every move. When they finally left, Harold let out a long breath. Friends of yours? He asked. Far from it. Ethan moved to the window, watching as the men mounted their horses. Harold, do you know if Sheriff Davis is in town today? Should be at his office. Want me to send my boy to fetch him? Please, Ethan turned back to the counter, and I'll take that silver comb. As Harold wrapped the purchase, he gave Ethan a concerned look. Those men seem to have some serious grudge against you. It's an old matter from before I came to Montana. Ethan paid for the comb, but I'd appreciate if you'd keep an eye out. If they return to town, send word to the Double S right away. Of course, Harold handed him the wrapped package. And Ethan, be careful. Men carrying old grudges can be unpredictable. Ethan nodded grimly. I'm well aware. His meeting with Sheriff Davis was brief but concerning. The sheriff knew little about the strangers but promised to keep an eye on them if they remained in the area. Ethan provided what information he could, including the suspicion that the leader, who called himself Harlan, might be connected to a group of cattle rustlers he'd helped apprehend during his ranger days. If they're here for revenge, they won't care who gets caught in the crossfire, Ethan warned. The Stones and Rebecca could be at risk simply by association with me. Sheriff Davis stroked his mustache thoughtfully. Might be best if you lay low for a bit, or consider moving on. No offense, but if these men are as dangerous as you say, your presence here puts others at risk. The suggestion struck Ethan like a physical blow. Leave. Just when he'd found a place that felt like home, a potential future with Rebecca and the ranch. Yet the sheriff's logic was sound. His presence could endanger everyone he'd come to care about. "I'll think on it," he said finally, though the thought of leaving filled him with a cold dread. The ride back to the ranch gave Ethan time to consider his options, none of which seemed good. He could confront Harlan and his men directly, potentially ending the threat but risking his own life in the process. He could leave Montana, drawing the danger away from the Stones. Or he could try to explain the situation to Samuel and Rebecca, though that would mean revealing parts of his past he'd rather keep buried. By the time he reached the ranch, Ethan had made no decisions except one. He would not put Rebecca in danger. Whatever that required of him, he would do it. Rebecca was in the garden when he returned, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "You're back earlier than expected," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Did you find what you needed in town?" Ethan dismounted, the package containing the silver comb suddenly heavy in his pocket. "Yes and no," he said, his expression grave enough that Rebecca's smile faded. "What's happened? Is your uncle around? There's something I need to discuss with both of you." Rebecca's concern deepened. "He's in the barn with Thomas, checking on the new calf. Ethan, you're worrying me." "I'm sorry," he touched her arm briefly, drawing comfort from the contact. "Let's find your uncle first." Samuel listened gravely as Ethan explained about the men in town and their apparent connection to his past. "So you believe these men might pose a threat to the ranch?" he asked. "To me directly," Ethan clarified. "But they're the type who wouldn't hesitate to use others as leverage. Simply by being associated with me, you could be at risk." Rebecca, who had been silent throughout the explanation, spoke up. "These men, they're from your time as a Texas Ranger. You never mentioned you were a Ranger." Ethan met her gaze, seeing hurt mingled with the concern in her eyes. "There are many things from that time I don't speak of. Things I'm not proud of." "The Rangers enforce the law," Samuel said. "What could you have done that would create such lasting enmity?" Ethan hesitated, then decided that full honesty was the only path forward. 8 years ago, I was part of a company tasked with stopping a gang of cattle rustlers operating near the Mexican border. The leader was a man named Fletcher, Harlan's brother, I believe. The confrontation. It didn't end well. "You killed him," Rebecca said softly, not a question but a statement. "Yes." Ethan's gaze dropped to his hands. "It wasn't in cold blood. Fletcher had killed 2 settlers and a fellow ranger. But Harlan wouldn't see it that way." Samuel ran a hand through his graying hair. "So what do you propose to do?" "The sheriff suggested I might consider moving on, drawing the threat away from here." "That's ridiculous," Rebecca interjected, her voice sharp with emotion. "Running solves nothing. These men would simply find you elsewhere." "Better elsewhere than here where you could be caught in the middle," Ethan argued. "So your solution is to leave. To go back to drifting from place to place, always looking over your shoulder." Rebecca stood, her eyes flashing with anger and something deeper fear. "That's not a solution, Ethan. That's surrender." Samuel placed a calming hand on his niece's arm. "Rebecca, perhaps you should let Ethan and me discuss this matter." "No," she said firmly, "I won't be excluded from a decision that affects all of us." She turned back to Ethan. "You've spent years running from connections, convincing yourself that isolation is safety. But it's not. It's just another form of fear." Her words struck at the heart of Ethan's carefully constructed worldview. "It's not that simple." "Isn't it?" Rebecca's voice softened. "You've found something here, Ethan, a place, people who care about you. Are you really willing to abandon that at the first sign of trouble?" Samuel cleared his throat. "Rebecca makes a valid point. Running isn't the answer. Neither is facing these men alone." He looked at Ethan with steady resolve. "This is my ranch, my home. If there's a threat to it or to my family, and I consider you part of that family now, then we face it together." Ethan looked between them, touched by their loyalty but terrified for their safety. You don't understand what these men are capable of. Perhaps not, Samuel agreed, but I understand what running does to a man's soul, and I understand that some things are worth fighting for. He stood, decision made. I'll ride into town tomorrow, speak with the sheriff about organizing some men to keep watch. In the meantime, we'll be vigilant. With that, he left the barn, giving Ethan and Rebecca a moment of privacy. He's right, you know, Rebecca said quietly. Some things are worth fighting for. She stepped closer. Some people are worth fighting for. Ethan looked into her eyes, seeing in them a future he desperately wanted but feared to claim. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. And I couldn't bear it if you left. Her honesty was disarming. These past months, getting to know you, learning from you, I've come to care for you deeply, Ethan. More than I thought possible. The words he'd been holding back for weeks finally found voice. I love you, Rebecca. That's why the thought of putting you in danger terrifies me. Rebecca's face softened with joy. Love shouldn't be a reason for separation. It should be a reason to stand together no matter what comes. She was so close now that Ethan could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Slowly giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question more than a demand, but when Rebecca responded by stepping closer, wrapping her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened into something more certain. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you, he murmured. Rebecca smiled. Love isn't about deserving, it's about accepting. And I accept all of you, Ethan Quincy, your past, your present, and whatever future we create together. In that moment, Ethan made his decision. He would not run. He would stand and fight for this woman, this place, this future. Whatever the cost. The next several days passed in a state of heightened alertness. Samuel returned from town with news that Sheriff Davis had organized several local men to keep watch for Harlan and his companions, but there had been no sign of them since their visit to the general store. Maybe they've moved on, Martha suggested hopefully during dinner. If their quarrel is with Ethan specifically, perhaps they realized he has too many allies here. Perhaps, Samuel agreed, though the look he exchanged with Ethan suggested neither man believed the threat had passed. Rebecca reached under the table to squeeze Ethan's hand. Since their declarations in the barn, they'd been open about their feelings, with Samuel and Martha's clear approval. The engagement wasn't official yet. Ethan wanted to resolve the threat before formally asking for Rebecca's hand, but their commitment to each other was evident to anyone who saw them together. After dinner, Ethan walked Rebecca to the garden she'd planted at the side of the house. The evening was warm, the sunset painting the sky in brilliant colors. It's beautiful tonight, Rebecca remarked, leaning against the garden fence. Yes, it is, Ethan agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the sunset. Rebecca smiled, catching his meaning. Flatterer. Just honest. He reached into his pocket, retrieving the small package he'd been carrying since his trip to town. I got something for you, before all the commotion in the store. Rebecca accepted the package with surprise. You didn't have to get me anything. I wanted to. He watched as she unwrapped the silver comb, her expression softening at the sight. Oh, Ethan, it's lovely. She ran her fingers over the delicate design. Thank you. It reminded me of you, beautiful but not fragile. He helped her place it in her hair. There. Perfect. Rebecca reached up to touch the comb, her eyes shining. No one has ever given me something so thoughtful. Get used to it, Ethan said softly. I intend to spend many years finding ways to make you smile like that. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted the moment. Ethan turned sharply, instinctively moving to place himself between Rebecca and the approaching rider. His hand went to his gun, but he relaxed slightly when he recognized Thomas, one of the ranch hands. Ethan. Miss Morgan, Thomas called, dismounting hurriedly. There's trouble. Sheriff Davis just rode in. He says those men from town were spotted heading this way about an hour ago. Mr. Stone is gathering the men. Ethan's heart raced. Rebecca, go inside. Stay with your aunt. Fear flashed across her face, but she nodded. Be careful, she said, touching his arm before hurrying toward the house. Ethan strode with Thomas toward the main barn, where Samuel and the other hands were already gathering. Sheriff Davis was there, his expression grim. 3 riders spotted heading this direction, he confirmed when Ethan approached. Matching the descriptions you gave, they made no secret of their intentions in town. Harlan was asking specifically about you and the Double S Ranch. Samuel handed Ethan a rifle. We've got 6 men including us. The sheriff makes 7, should be enough to discourage 3 troublemakers. Don't underestimate them, Ethan warned. Harlan wouldn't come unless he felt he had the advantage. As if to confirm his suspicion, a shout came from one of the hands watching from the edge of the property. Riders coming, more than 3, I count at least 8. Ethan exchanged a look with Samuel. He's brought reinforcements. Then so have we, Samuel replied steadily. This is our home. We defend it. The next hour passed in tense preparation. The women were secured in the house with Thomas guarding them. The remaining men positioned themselves strategically around the property, with clear lines of sight but good cover. Ethan took position near the main approach to the ranch, a rifle ready but his trusted revolver close at hand. As the sun sank below the horizon, the first riders appeared on the crest of the hill leading to the ranch. Harlan led them, easily recognizable by his size and the distinctive hat he wore. Behind him rode 7 men, all armed, their intentions clear in their posture. Sheriff Davis stepped forward as the riders approached, his badge visible in the fading light. That's far enough, he called. State your business or turn around. Harlan reined in his horse, the other riders stopping behind him. He surveyed the ranch, his gaze eventually finding Ethan partially concealed behind a water trough. My business is with Ethan Quincy, he called back. Send him out and the rest of you can go about your day. That's not how the law works in Pine Creek, the sheriff responded. Any grievance you have can be addressed civilly, without weapons and threats. Harlan laughed, a harsh sound without humor. There's nothing civil about what Quincy did to my brother. This is about justice, not law. Your brother was a murderer, Ethan called, standing to make himself visible. He killed innocent people. What happened to him was the consequence of his own actions. A convenient story, Harlan snarled, but Fletcher would never have fired first. You executed him. That's not true and you know it. Ethan stepped forward, ignoring Samuel's warning hiss. Your brother drew on us. He shot Rogers point blank before any of us could react. What happened after was self-defense. Liar, Harlan's face contorted with rage. You Rangers thought you were above the law. Decided who lived and who died. We enforced the law, Ethan corrected. Just as Sheriff Davis is doing now. This vendetta won't bring your brother back. It will only get more people killed. For a moment, it seemed Harlan might be considering Ethan's words. Then his expression hardened. The only person dying today is you, Quincy. He turned to his men. Take him, kill anyone who gets in the way. What followed was chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Ethan dove for cover as bullets splintered the wood of the water trough. He returned fire, aiming for Harlan but hitting one of his companions instead. The man fell from his horse with a cry. The initial volley of gunfire gave way to a more calculated exchange. Harlan and his remaining men had taken cover behind rocks and the few trees near the approach. Samuel and the ranch hands maintained their positions, creating a standoff. This is foolishness, Sheriff Davis shouted during a lull. You're outnumbered, Harlan. Surrender now and face proper justice. Harlan's response was another bullet that narrowly missed the sheriff's head. As the firefight continued, Ethan noticed movement at the side of the ranch house. His blood ran cold when he realized it was Rebecca, slipping out the back door against his explicit instructions. She was moving toward the barn, keeping low and using the shadows for cover. Damn it, Ethan muttered. What was she thinking? He needed to get to her before Harlan or his men spotted her. Using the gunfire as cover, Ethan worked his way back toward the house, staying low and moving from one piece of cover to the next. He was halfway there when he heard a triumphant shout from one of Harlan's men. Boss, look there, a woman. Ethan's heart stopped. they'd spotted Rebecca. In the growing darkness, he could just make out her figure as she froze, caught in the open between the house and barn. "Well, well," Harlan called. "Seems Quincy has found himself a lady friend. Bring her here." Two of Harlan's men broke from cover, running toward Rebecca. Samuel and the sheriff fired, forcing them back, but the message was clear. Rebecca was now a target. Ethan abandoned caution, racing toward her. "Rebecca, get down." She dropped to the ground just as a bullet whistled over her head. Ethan reached her seconds later, pulling her behind the woodpile stacked against the barn. "What are you doing out here?" he demanded, his fear making his voice harsh. "I told you to stay in the house." "They were circling around," Rebecca explained, her voice steady despite the danger. "I saw them from the window, two men heading for the back of the house. I was trying to warn you." Ethan's anger turned to cold determination. If Harlan had men circling to the rear, they were attempting to outflank them. "Martha could be in danger. Stay here," he ordered. "Don't move until I come back for you." Before she could respond, Ethan slipped away, moving toward the back of the property. In the darkness, he nearly collided with one of Harlan's men. The man's surprise gave Ethan the split second he needed to bring the butt of his rifle down on the man's head, dropping him unconscious to the ground. The second man was more prepared. He fired as Ethan rounded the corner of the barn, the bullet grazing Ethan's arm. The sharp pain only heightened Ethan's focus. He returned fire, hitting the man in the shoulder, then closed the distance between them. A brief struggle ended with the man disarmed and subdued. "How many more of you are there?" Ethan demanded. The man spat blood, "Enough to kill you and everyone on this ranch." Ethan's fear for Rebecca and the others outweighed any mercy he might have felt. "Where are they positioned?" When the man remained silent, Ethan pressed the barrel of his gun to the man's temple. "Last chance." "Just Harlan and the 5 others you can see," the man admitted, his bravado crumbling. "There ain't no one else." Relief flooded Ethan, though the situation remained dire. He secured the man with his own belt, then moved back toward where he'd left Rebecca. To his dismay, she was no longer there. A renewed burst of gunfire from the front of the property drew his attention. The main confrontation was escalating. As Ethan moved toward the sound, a scream cut through the night, Martha's voice coming from the house. Ethan changed direction, running for the back door. Inside, he found Martha kneeling beside Thomas, who lay on the floor, blood seeping from a wound in his side. "What happened?" Ethan asked, kneeling to check the young ranch hand's pulse. It was weak but steady. "One of them broke in," Martha explained, her hands pressing a cloth to Thomas's wound. Thomas tried to stop him. The man struck him down, then grabbed Rebecca when she tried to help. He dragged her out the front. Cold terror gripped Ethan. "When?" "Just moments ago. Samuel saw and went after them." Ethan squeezed Martha's shoulder. "Stay with Thomas, I'll find Rebecca." Outside, the situation had deteriorated. Samuel was pinned down behind a water trough, exchanging fire with 3 of Harlan's men. The sheriff and the remaining ranch hands were likewise engaged, leaving no one to pursue Harlan, who was dragging a struggling Rebecca toward his horse. "Harlan," Ethan shouted, stepping into the open. "Let her go, this is between you and me." Harlan turned, keeping Rebecca in front of him as a shield. "Exactly right, Quincy. So throw down your weapons and come out here, or the lady gets a bullet." Rebecca's eyes met Ethan's across the distance, fear mingling with determination in her gaze. She gave the slightest nod, a gesture so subtle that only someone watching for it would notice. Ethan understood her intention immediately. They had practiced this, a defensive move he had taught her during their lessons, designed to break free from just such a hold. "All right," Ethan called, lowering his rifle to the ground slowly. "Let her go and I'll come peacefully." "Throw down that revolver too," Harlan demanded. "Then walk forward with your hands up." Ethan complied, removing his gun belt and dropping it beside the rifle. He raised his hands, stepping forward deliberately. "That's it," Harlan said, his grip on Rebecca loosening slightly as his attention focused on Ethan. "Justice is finally coming for you, Quincy." When Ethan was approximately 20 paces away, he gave Rebecca the signal they had practiced, a slight tilt of his head. In one smooth motion, Rebecca stomped hard on Harlan's instep, simultaneously driving her elbow into his stomach. As he reflexively loosened his grip, she twisted away, dropping to the ground and rolling clear. The moment she was free, Ethan charged forward. Harlan, recovering quickly, raised his gun, but Ethan was already upon him. They collided with force, both men falling to the ground. The gun discharged into the air as they struggled. Harlan was larger and fueled by years of hatred, but Ethan fought with the clarity of purpose that comes from protecting someone beloved. They rolled in the dirt, trading blows, each seeking an advantage. A sharp pain in Ethan's side told him Harlan had drawn a knife. He grasped the man's wrist, keeping the blade from penetrating deeper, and delivered a powerful blow to Harlan's temple with his free hand. The strike stunned Harlan long enough for Ethan to wrench the knife away. "It's over, Harlan," Ethan gasped, pinning the larger man beneath him. "Your men are down or surrendering. You've lost." "It's never over," Harlan snarled, still struggling. "Not while you live. Your brother made his choices, so did you." Ethan tightened his grip. "And now you'll face the consequences just as he did." Sheriff Davis arrived, his gun trained on Harlan. "Stand down, Harlan, it's finished." With the sheriff's help, Ethan secured Harlan. Only then did he realize the extent of his own injury. The knife had cut deep into his side, and blood was soaking his shirt. "Ethan," Rebecca ran to him as he staggered, suddenly lightheaded. "You're hurt." "It's not bad," he lied, even as his vision began to blur. "Are you all right? Did he harm you?" "I'm fine," she assured him, her hands already pressing against his wound to stem the bleeding. "But you need the doctor. Samuel, help me get him inside." The next hours passed in a haze of pain and concerned voices. The doctor was summoned from town, arriving with the reinforcements Sheriff Davis had sent for. Harlan and his surviving men were taken into custody. The ranch, while damaged, remained standing. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness as the doctor cleaned and stitched his wound. Each time he opened his eyes, Rebecca was there, her face drawn with worry but determined. "Stay with me," she whispered during one lucid moment, her hand cool against his fevered brow. "Don't you dare leave now, Ethan Quincy. Not when we've only just found each other." "Never," he promised weakly before darkness claimed him again. Recovery was slow and painful. The knife had missed vital organs but had cut deep enough to cause significant blood loss. For 3 days, Ethan battled a fever that left him delirious and weak. Through it all, Rebecca remained by his side, tending to him with a dedication that moved even the doctor. "You've got yourself a remarkable woman there," the doctor commented on his third visit, as Rebecca momentarily stepped out to refresh the water basin. "I've seen seasoned nurses with less composure." Ethan, more lucid now that the fever had broken, nodded. "She's stronger than she looks." "Most frontier women are," the doctor agreed. "They have to be, but it's more than strength with her, it's love." He packed his instruments. "And that, young man, is the best medicine there is." By the end of the week, Ethan was able to sit up, though moving remained painful. Samuel brought news from town. Harlan and his men were being held for trial in the county seat. Given the number of witnesses to their attack and attempted kidnapping, a conviction was all but certain. "It's over," Samuel said, settling into the chair beside Ethan's bed. "They won't trouble you or this ranch again." Ethan nodded, relief mingling with lingering concern. "I've put you all in terrible danger. Your home, your family." "Our home," Samuel corrected, "our family, and that includes you now whether you like it or not." He leaned forward. "When a man is willing to die protecting what matters, he's no longer a visitor, he's kin." The words touched Ethan deeply. "Thank you for everything." "No thanks needed," Samuel stood. "Now about that partnership we discussed before this mess. The offer still stands if you're interested." Ethan smiled. "I am very much so." "Good. We'll discuss details when you're stronger." Samuel paused at the door, and Ethan. "Don't wait too long to make an honest woman of my niece. Martha's already planning the wedding." Ethan chuckled, then winced as the movement pulled at his stitches. I won't wait a day longer than necessary." True to his word, the moment Ethan could stand without assistance, he asked Samuel formally for Rebekah's hand. The older man's approval was immediate and enthusiastic. The proposal itself took place in the garden Rebekah had planted, now flourishing with late summer blooms. Ethan had secreted away a simple but elegant ring purchased in town, a gold band set with a small diamond that had cost nearly all his savings. Rebekah found him there at sunset, carrying a basket of fresh herbs she'd cut for Martha. She smiled at the sight of him, her face lighting up in a way that still amazed Ethan. "Should you be out here alone?" she asked, setting down her basket. "You're still healing." "I had something important to do," Ethan replied, taking her hands in his. "Something that couldn't wait any longer." Rebekah's eyes widened as he carefully lowered himself to one knee, his wound protesting but his determination unwavering. "Rebekah Morgan," he began, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "When you arrived at the Double S, I was a man who believed he was better off alone. You changed that. You showed me that real strength isn't found in isolation but in connection, in love." He drew the ring from his pocket. "I love you more than I thought possible. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Rebekah's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Yes," she whispered, "yes, with all my heart." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her, Ethan felt the final pieces of his old beliefs fall away. The frontier wasn't just a place of danger and solitude. It was a place where love could take root and flourish, even in the harshest conditions. Their wedding took place that autumn, when the aspens turned gold and the air carried the first hint of winter. The entire town of Pine Creek turned out for the celebration, held at the Double S Ranch. Rebekah wore a gown Martha had secretly ordered from Denver, and Ethan cut a fine figure in a new suit, his recovery complete except for a scar that would always remind him of what he'd nearly lost, and what he'd gained. Sheriff Davis, now a good friend, stood as Ethan's best man. "Never thought I'd see the day," he teased during the reception. "The solitary cowboy tamed at last." Ethan laughed, his gaze finding Rebekah across the room where she danced with her uncle. "Not tamed, just finally home." As the seasons changed from autumn to winter, and winter gave way to spring, the Double S Ranch flourished under the joint stewardship of Samuel and Ethan. The partnership agreement was formalized, with Ethan and Rebekah taking over the day-to-day operations as Samuel and Martha eased into a less demanding role. The railroad did indeed come to the area the following year, bringing with it new opportunities for the ranch. Ethan negotiated contracts to supply beef to the railroad crews and later to the new settlements that sprang up along the line. Under his and Rebekah's management, the Double S expanded, acquiring additional grazing land and improving its breeding stock. But the greatest joy came with the birth of their first child, a daughter they named Sarah, after Ethan's mother. As he held his newborn daughter, marveling at her tiny perfection, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had arrived in Montana a solitary drifter, convinced that the frontier was no place for connection or vulnerability. He had believed that surviving meant remaining alone, untethered to people or places that could be lost. How wrong he had been. Standing at the window of their home, Rebekah came to join him, slipping her arm around his waist as they both gazed down at their daughter. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple. "About how the things we fear most are often the very things that save us." Rebekah looked up at him questioningly. "I was so afraid of attachment, of putting down roots," he explained. "I thought it made me vulnerable when in truth it gave me something worth fighting for, worth living for." Rebekah smiled, understanding in her eyes. "And here I was afraid the West would be too harsh, too lonely after Chicago. Instead, I found everything I never knew I was seeking." Outside, the Montana landscape stretched toward the distant mountains, as wild and beautiful as ever. But it no longer seemed a place of isolation to Ethan. Instead, it was the backdrop for the life he and Rebekah were building together, a life rich with love, purpose, and the deep satisfaction that comes from finding one's true home. "I love you," he whispered, holding his wife and daughter close. "Both of you, more than I can ever say." "Then don't say it," Rebecca replied with a smile. "Show us every day just as you have been doing." And he did through the years that followed, as their family grew and the Double S Ranch prospered. The gentle cowboy and the headstrong woman had discovered not just love, but a shared journey that transformed them both, proving that even in the wild, untamed West, the greatest frontier of all was the human heart.